Elizabeth asked the question, what does negative work mean? Let's go back to the definition of work. And we'll start just from a purely mathematical point of view. From the idea of just pure math, W can clearly be a negative number if the angle theta falls into the right quadrant. For instance, if theta is 180 degrees, cosine theta is -1. So there shouldn't be any mathematical problem with work being negative because it's allowed by the cosine function to have negative values. Okay, well that doesn't give you any insight into what that means though, so let's think about the meaning of this. First way to think about the meaning, there's going to be several ways to interpret this. The first meaning is that whenever the force vector and the displacement vector point in opposite directions, you have a negative work. By the way, they don't have to be in completely opposite directions. They don't have to be 180 degrees. They could be something like this, and that would still give you negative work. It would still be okay if it was like this. But most of the situations we deal with in this class, they will be exactly 180 degrees off. So again, from here, then it follows by the mathematical definition, cosine 180 is -1, and that's negative work. Again, maybe not a whole lot of insight yet. Now, let's think about when this situation often occurs. This situation is always the case for resistive forces, friction, air resistance, water resistance, like in the homework problem. Friction always opposes the motion. So a friction force will always give you negative work. Okay. There are other times when this could be true too. For instance, let's say that you parked your car on a hill and your brakes fail. I hope this never happens to you. And your car starts rolling down the hill and you're like, uh-oh, I gotta stop my car from rolling. And you try pushing against the car. That's maybe not a very safe thing to do, but you are now applying a force that's in the opposite direction of the car's motion. You're doing negative work on the car. Okay, so we've kind of established mathematically and graphically that negative work is possible. So what does this mean in terms of energy? Well, we learned the work-energy theorem that says that work is related to the change in kinetic energy. So if you do positive work, that means kinetic energy increases. If you do negative work, then kinetic energy decreases. If the change in kinetic energy is negative, that means kinetic energy decreases. That means your system slows down. Friction forces always do negative work. They tend to slow objects down. Your car rolling down the hill is tending to speed up, but now if you start pushing, you're slowing down that car. By doing negative work on the car, you're slowing it down. Now, work is not a vector. It doesn't have a direction. It's a scalar quantity. So I've said previously that most of the times in physics, plus and minus signs indicate directions. This is a case where that's not true. When you have scalar quantities like energy, plus and minus signs are just used to talk about an increase or a decrease in some quantity. So negative work is telling you that an object's kinetic energy is going to decrease. And finally, so that's the work energy theorem. And finally, you can think about negative work in the context of the law of conservation of energy with non-conservative forces. Where we have initial potential energy plus initial kinetic energy plus the work done by non-conservative forces equals final potential energy plus final kinetic energy. And what this is saying here is that when there is some force doing work on a system, then it's changing the total amount of energy, mechanical energy in that system. So if you have a problem where there's friction, this work done by friction is negative, and that means you are removing some mechanical energy from the system. So after some process occurs, the final amount of energy is going to be less than the initial amount of energy. This total will be less than that total because you're subtracting some of this stuff. So to sum it up in a really short statement, negative work slows things down.